Thank you, Fernando. So welcome again to this webinar where we will present work we have been doing and are doing on regulatory sandboxes and present the outcomes of knowledge exchange project within ISGAN for to enable smart grid deployment. So the agenda is in brief then the introduction as we are in now, and then about the project that we have been working with and are finalizing, and also about results on the sandbox project and the way forward. And then finally we will have a questions and answers session. And the speakers you see here, it's Dr. Klaus Kubecko, who is Senior Expert Advisor at the Austrian Institute of Technology, AIT. We have Helena Lindqvist, who is working on behalf of the Swedish Energy Agency, as well as myself. And she is a knowledge transfer or exchange, we can say, specialist. And myself, Magnus Olofsson, I'm ISGAN National Expert for Sweden. And then finally we have Nicole Kerkhoff-Damen, who is working for the Dutch Enterprise Agency in the Netherlands. And Nicole will comment on a very interesting case on sandboxes applied in the Netherlands as part of the Q&A, the questions and answers session. Then very short, you already heard from Fernando, but I can just add a little more very quick about ISGAN. ISGAN in a nutshell. Here we have the standard presentation for that, and we can just say that IEA ISGAN is part of IEA because it's a TCP, Technology Collaboration Program, and it's also an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial, CEM, and it was actually established at the CEM2 meeting in Abu Dhabi in 2011 as an implementing agreement under the IEA agenda. So there are links to IEA and to CEM, and ISGAN creates a strategic platform to support high-level government attention and action for accelerating development and deployment of smarter, cleaner electricity grids around the world. So that's the aim of ISGAN then. Okay. Seem to have a problem with connection here, so I think I lost connection. Can someone else maybe put the next slide up, because I think I'm connected on sound. Then we have the ISGAN's worldwide presence, and ISGAN is active across Asia, the Pacific, Europe, North America, and Africa. And we are keen to have more geographic diversity and representation in South America and Africa. And then we can go to the next, which is value proposition. We think ISGAN provides unique value by leveraging a broad and diverse network, including policymakers engaged at various levels to facilitate knowledge sharing and project coordination, utilizing strong platforms of our key partners in the IEA, CEM, Global Smart Grid Federation, DSGF, Mission Innovation, and others. And then we go to the next slide. That is a slide actually from 2 weeks from today, back in time. It's Clean Energy Ministerial Meeting CEM10 in Vancouver, and I'm actually on the picture there where I had the honor to present. That was the launch day of two results, outcomes of the Sandbox initiative. First of all, a regulatory sandbox case book, as we call it, with case studies collected from various places, and also policy messages to policymakers as the other product that we presented during this day. And this day was it was an official side event to SAM in connection jointly with ISGAN and Mission Innovation Challenge 1, which is Smart Grid. So by that I leave the next part of the presentation first to Helena and then to Klaus. So please, Helena, you take over after me then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Magnus. So before going into the details regarding the Sandbox project, I'm briefly going to tell you a little bit about the ISGAN Knowledge Transfer Project concept and how it has been developed. And the motivation for developing the KTP, as the abbreviation of a knowledge transfer project, it originally came from the conclusions of the 6th Clean Energy Ministerial meeting in Mexico in May 2015, where the ministers issued the Power System Challenge joint statement. And given the urgency of the Clean Energy Transition Challenge, this statement really urged the various SEM initiatives, among them being ISGAN, to explore and deploy more efficient methods for knowledge sharing and dissemination of experience and examples of good practice between countries on matters relating to clean energy. So to put the words of the SEM joint statement into action, in 2016, ISGAN Annex 2 took the initiative to create such a concept for more deep dive and interactive dialogue, focusing much more on learning and capacity building to take place between peers from the policy, academic and business communities within ISGAN. And this approach, as I said, came to be known as the ISGAN Knowledge Transfer Project. So the objectives of this approach is really to unpack and exploit the tacit or hidden knowledge as opposed to the explicit knowledge that can be sourced from documents and reports similar. To exploit this hidden knowledge in multidisciplinary groups of smart grid and energy professionals from different countries and from different walks of life. So what we want to do is to accelerate smart grid development by building upon lessons learned in different countries and situations, and importantly, not only to talk about the success stories, because of course there's a lot of valuable learning also in failed experiments, and we need to dare to talk about those. So the KTP is also a way to identify new solutions by combining the transfer of knowledge between stakeholders of existing experience, but also to combine it with the co-creation element. So it's knowledge transfer and innovation, basically, together. And we have a very high ambition with our projects and always strive for a concrete result, and most often this could be in the form of a policy brief for decision makers, for example, and that would be in addition, of course, to the takeaways for each individual country. So how do we achieve these objectives? So very briefly, we employ a highly structured approach with a series of activities that support the learning, and the key one being the KTP workshop, where most of the project results are co-created between the participants. And each project is designed and focused on the participants' needs and interest in the topic, and that's very important. And to create a good atmosphere for learning and sharing experiences, we use a highly interactive and very informal format whereby peers work together on defining challenges and identifying solutions. And the key feature is that we invest a lot of attention on advanced preparations before working together in the KTP workshop. So, for example, with participant surveys, preparatory webinars, and reports being prepared. So, and we also maintain a high level of engagement with our participants throughout the process. So here are just some examples of KTP projects that we have done so far, and the flags indicate the countries where we held the workshops. Yep, and so coming a bit closer to the topic of this webinar on the experimental sandboxes for smart grid. So here an example of a type of way of setting up a KTP project, and it could look a little bit different from time to time. So in this project, we had a very fruitful collaboration between different ISGAN annexes, but also importantly with ICER, as Magnus mentioned before, the International Confederation of Energy Regulators. So the activities of this project were, we started with a participant survey to understand the situation in different countries and what the priorities and interests were. And based on the results of the survey, we made the detailed design of the project. We also had a preparatory webinar with the participants to introduce the topic and hear about some sandbox cases. And then there was the, there's a lot of noise now suddenly. Oh, okay. Then there was the big KTP workshop in Stockholm on the 1st of April, which was a very intensive day indeed, with about 45 people from more than 20 countries. And I think some of the people listening today might have been in this workshop. So it was a mix of regulators, policymakers, funding agencies, and researchers present. And then we took the conclusions. Oh yeah, you're switching the picture there. Then we took the conclusions from the workshop and discussed further with a wider set of stakeholders in one of the tracks of the ISGAN public workshop the following day on the 2nd of April. And a key component of the project is also the casebook that you will hear about more later. I'll switch back to the actual process slide. And the results of these activities were summarized into policy messages delivered at the Clean Energy Ministerial meeting in Vancouver that Magnus talked about previously. And today we're having this webinar. It's also part of the project, and we summarize the results of the initiative so far and to disseminate these also to other interested stakeholders. And we feel we have started a very lively discussion on this topic, and to let this continue, we've started a LinkedIn group where participants and other interested parties can interact. And there's also a repository of information on sandboxes. I'll just show you the picture from the last picture from the 2nd of April. Here we have Dirk Bauknecht from Öko Institute in Germany, and also our next speaker, Klaus Kubetsko from AIT in Austria, that I will now hand over the word to. He will explain much more in detail about our results from our project. So, Klaus, take it away. Yeah, Klaus?
Dear listeners, thank you for your interest in learning more about the results of the ISGAN project on regulatory experimenting. It's great to speak to you in such a global audience, and I'm also happy to answer your questions after my presentations, as well as Nicole will in the special case of the Dutch examples. I will give you a brief information about motivations, understanding, and current status for countries involved in our activities. Then I will explain the scope and innovation goals, giving some examples, particularly from the Netherlands and also Italy, to illustrate this. After this, I will give you a brief summary of what you can expect from ISGAN Casebook and what were the main conclusions, ideas, and discussion points from the KTP workshop in Stockholm. And finally, I will summarize the policy messages that were communicated to the Clean Energy Ministerial this May in Canada. So let me start with the motivation for focusing on regulatory experimental sandboxes. There is a strong need for speeding up energy transition, which is acknowledged by basically all stakeholders now, and thus also innovation and replication processes in the energy system are to be speeded up. The current status in that in many countries is that demonstration and pilot projects have already shown the technological possibilities. However, those projects take place under very specific conditions and within the limits of a given context, conditions. One of these context conditions is regulation. In many interviews and media and meta studies, for example, the Reflex project within that smart energy system project that was also presented this spring in this forum. So regulation was identified as one of the main hindering factors for innovation and replication. I don't intend to discuss the definitions of what kind of regulatory experimenting is taking place in different countries. Still, there are several terms used which can be interpreted differently. If you want to learn more about this, please refer to the introductory section of the ISGAN Casebook. In this presentation, I will mainly use the term regulatory sandbox or experimental sandbox, as it is the term currently used most frequently. So when we talk about regulatory experimenting, we mean experimenting in new solutions, use cases, in the sense of product, process, service, marketing innovations, but also institutional innovations, and this including regulatory innovations and organizational innovations, for example, such as virtual power plants, citizens' energy communities, new kinds of markets. And also innovations leading to the functioning of the whole system, so system innovation. And we mean by experimenting which requires changes, adaptations, exemptions in regulatory frameworks. We consider this broadly as the role of regulation in the market economy, as providing the rules of the game as it is. This is independently from where the concrete market structure is, and that can be vertically integrated or deregulated ones. It means the set of regulations we are covering here includes energy law, specific detailed laws in energy system or electricity system. It includes technical specifications such as grid codes, as well as more overarching legal structures such as competitiveness law in different countries. The innovators involved in experimenting can be local grid operators, energy communities, municipal utilities, aggregators, etc. So a broad range. The scale of measures implemented in related public support initiatives in most cases will be innovation projects and or replication projects, meaning pilots, proof of concept trials under the certain experimental conditions such as legally binding waivers and derogations. Regulated sandbox programs become more widespread, and globally we have identified in the project 7 countries that already have implemented sandbox programs, or the framework conditions for sandbox programs, which are Germany, Italy, South Korea, the Netherlands, Singapore, and United Kingdom. And 8 countries are in the stage of discussing, designing, or proposing a sandbox program for implementation. Those countries are Australia, Austria, Denmark, France, Ireland, Norway, Spain, and Sweden. Just today, Austria issued the first call for the so-called Energiefreiraum, or Energy Free Space program, a €5 million program to lower the barriers for the implementation of innovation solutions. This slide just shows where initiatives are taking place or are planned. It's no indication of the success of such programs, as this all is in a very early stage and there are rather only very few evaluation results available. In the preparatory survey for the KTP workshop, one question was, what should the scope of a sandbox program be? And the interviewees could select several of the points, and there was a response of 25 respondents from 15 countries. And so if you question yourself what is meant under other, for example, this includes blockchain initiatives for distributed ledgers. So the message of this is basically the scope is often beyond smart grid only, so only electricity grids, but mostly so those are mostly in combination with sector coupling and or energy storage. Nearly all participants considered flexibility issues as the key challenge. And only some seem to consider smart homes, so behind what's happening behind the meter as a question relevant for sandbox programs. Now you might ask yourself what those experiments are that are granted exemptions. Now one example, and Nicole might give you more details later on if you're interested. The Schoenship in Amsterdam, it's a so-called project network, and it's an operational project network. In this overall project, there are 46 sustainable floating water houses that are planned in the complex at the canal in Amsterdam North. You can see the current status where we are. So there are already several houses built and constructed. And on the right side, you will see like the connection box for the electricity connections here, which is one of the main issues. So the exemption is through the Dutch Experiment Electricity Act. These homes are intended to be energy self-sufficient as possible and have a private smart electricity grid, which will be installed basically behind the meter under parentheses. So Schoenship will inhabit 105 inhabitants, have 500 solar panels and 30 heat pumps installed, and will use zero gas. The house owners agreed to have a limited capacity for connecting to the grid, and this is the most interesting feature here from the side of those house owners. So basically the exemption regarded shift of what is taking place at the low voltage sites to the transformer, respectively redefining what is considered as behind the meter, so that not each of the houses has its own connection, but that they have a collective connection. And technologically, the project aims to optimize the generation, the use and storage of energy within the limits of the guaranteed capacity. That means, for example, so if each house would have, let's say, 16 kilowatt peak, and with 30 households attached, this would together mean that instead of 480 kilowatt hour peak, they will only get a connection with 400 kilowatt hour peak, which would be the limit of the transformer. So they really have to optimize their internal working to make this really happen. Otherwise, the fuse would blow. If you want to see, think about other examples, particularly the focus of regulatory experimenting in Italy from the regulator side, Avera, they have several focuses, which include smart grid, smart metering, demand response, storage, e-mobility, wind integration as some examples. And so what are the kind of innovations that we are talking about? So products, for example, that can be control units for energy management. Service innovations could be peer-to-peer exchange of energy and flexibility services. Platform solutions, for example, could be blockchain for trusted peer-to-peer exchange. An example for platform solutions that can be mentioned is the option-supported Verve blockchain, which is currently being implemented as a social housing community in London, where Verve executes the UK's first peer-to-peer trade of energy using blockchain, and that started in April last year, so there might be already some results. Another example are tariff models, like grid tariffs for battery storage, whether you have to pay for one or for inflowing, outflowing electricity. There could be operational models, like for local energy communities, trying to develop operational models for that, and business models such as aggregator models for mixed virtual dispatchable units, as in Italy has also experimented with. Okay, I do not want to go into the definitions. If there are questions regarding this, then we can discuss this in the end. Let me come to the casebook. And the cases there. We had, in this casebook, we have descriptions on what is happening in Australia, Austria, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, UK, and US. In Australia, we have a regulatory sandbox arrangement that is to support proof of concept trials in the Australian national electricity market. The current status is that several players are suggesting to the legislators how to arrange for experimental clauses and to set up the program. This is a similar stage that we have in Austria with the Energiefreiraum, where there is also the first call out for like how to design this program in detail. In Germany, the showcase energy, the Smart Energy Showcase, the so-called SINTEG program on digital agenda of the energy transition, where there is an experimental clause installed, where so far there haven't been projects using this clause started. In Italy, and this is one of the most interesting cases for the last several years, there already exist several activities, including also the Netherlands, with these experimental projects. And most well-known probably is the UK case, Ofgem's Innovation Link project, which you can find on their web page. It's quite easy to find out what they have been doing there. The last case in our casebook is on Hawaii. It's not directly a regulatory sandbox, as the experimenting there is going on for a whole state, and the experiences from that might be taken up by the whole United States once this is successful. So in the case of the Netherlands, the experimental projects can be two types, starting in 2015 with experiments on exemptions. There have been 17 projects approved so far, and they are still ongoing. The first type is large experiments. Large experiments means experimenting in the distribution system operators group with a maximum of 10,000 customers using electricity. And the other one is this, what I already mentioned, the project network, a joint energy network of up to 500 customers with only one DSO connecting to the grid. The waiver holder may combine production, supply, and management of the local electricity grid. Compared to a large experiment, they can also operate a local electricity grid. And the applicant in this case is a cooperative or a homeowner association. In the case of Italy, there have been, over the last 10 years or so, 5 different topics. In Italy, the regulator is identifying the issues, the questions, and doing this calls more top-down with respect to the topics compared to, for example, Ofgem in the UK. So they identified this, and to give an example for smart electricity grids, the first one on advanced solutions and functionalities. The goal was to test in the real field the management of active electricity distribution networks. And in this case, the derogation was and to be able to give an extra remuneration of capital costs of 2% to ordinary return rate for a period of 12 years. So this is some kind of incentive to for the investment in this case. They also had experiments on utility scale energy storage systems and dynamic thermal rating of transmission lines, EV charging pilot projects, Chain 2 performance in the second generation of smart meters, improving the functionalities of smart meters, and in the last round on flexibility and demand response through aggregation. The goal in this case was opening of an auxiliary service market to new resources through aggregation of renewable and distributed generation units, as well as active demand units. And the derogations were several. Number one, relaxing the minimum threshold for participating in the auxiliary service market from 10 megawatt and to 1 megawatt. So there could be more actors involved in that, more smaller actors. Number two, the renewable sources generation unit and the demand unit were allowed, providing that the virtual aggregator unit would reach the threshold of this 1 megawatt. And third, the possibility to different entities for balancing service parties and balancing responsible parties, so that these different roles could be differentiated. So this are the examples that we can give. Now let me give you just a brief overview of our discussions that we had in the KTP Sandbox workshop and new ideas. The legislative process is too slow for tackling climate change. This was consensus finding, and speeding up the transformative innovation process is a main argument for these kind of experimental regulatory sandboxes to establish. They should be applied only when current regulation blocks innovation, so not for every kind of innovation activity. This is seen as useful and legitimate. The main difference between countries with respect to the different kinds of experimenting is, to a large extent, the difference in countries with the stage of deregulation or regulation and vertically integrated versus unbundled organizational forms. So the second point is that regulators have significant different room for granting exemptions in different countries. In some cases, there is more room for maneuvering. In others, there is less flexibility for the regulator to act. Learning is as important as running the sandbox projects. And one of the ideas was to have an obligatory knowledge exchange, for example, to communities of practice, to provide a trustful practitioners exchange, and that all who are involved in the program can profit also from the failures that have taken place. And finally, there is the request for competition for the access to experimental sandboxes. There are enough current instruments, and we should not replace them. Regulators have to have some role in approval and advising pre-sandbox. For sandboxes was one of the interesting ideas, so to really have some kind of proof of concept, or particularly to have some kind of simulation, the simulation gaming taking place before and as a legitimation for establishing the sandbox. As this is also about social aspects and societal aspects, a selection criteria could be also a so-called social readiness level, as different to the technological readiness level. We also had some open discussions. Particularly regulators had also their comments and the discussion points, which I also want to raise here in addition. Sandbox granting only after traditional projects successfully have been carried out, such as the next phase. Prioritizing of projects should include a significant benefit for society, not just an economic benefit. Limited access. Somebody has taken my screen away. Okay, now it's there again. And impact must be assessed, and any risks need to be mitigated. Finally, as a last point, let me come to the policy messages that we have sent to the Clean Energy Ministerial in May. The messages for the decision makers are that regulatory sandbox programs should aim at speeding up energy transition with smart grids, foster innovation by lifting up, removing barriers in current regulation. Learning, as I already mentioned, is as important as experimenting with sandboxes. Regulatory bodies may tell whether a regulatory exemption is necessary or not, so there is an advisory function also that is very interesting in those programs. Learning among innovators can be intensified and should be intensified to avoid making mistakes that already others have made. For regulatory bodies and legislators, the trials in the regulatory sandboxes provide valuable evidence to help understand whether and how regulation should change permanently. So this is an important feature for speeding up the process. And policies have to be orchestrated with complementary actions. It's not only innovation policies, but research and innovation policy instruments should be aligned with legislative measures, with, for example, also innovation-oriented regulatory bodies and activities, and the instruments of energy policy. The involvement of the regulatory bodies is key they should be involved in enabling sandbox programs from the beginning and should have an active role in fostering innovation towards more sustainable energy systems. And the overall aim should be to change the goals for regulatory bodies towards a balanced weight on long and short-term social and societal benefits, so that they can also act more towards the needs of climate change and other societal questions. So this rounds up the presentation and the summary of what we have been working on, and thank you for your attention, and I'm